Welcome, everyone, to episode 37 of Ty's Training, Talking with My Dad. We are back for real this time. This is our third season. It's been a little bit of a patchy start here, but we are going to hopefully fall into our weekly rhythm, so you can look forward to that now that I am back in my home base here in Quito. This is the week of January 12th, 2026. I'm Ty, and as always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host and father, Mr. C, aka Tim Andrews, for another look at training and life in the midst of this giant, sprawling, multi-year project called Project Himalaya. And as I've come to think of it, this is our third season, which we're calling Third Time's the Charm. So hopefully this is the last season that we are talking to you guys about Everest. As I mentioned, I'm finally back here in my home sweet home in Quito with my house, my tortoise, my cactuses. Everyone made it safely through the few months that I was away.
Yay.
Very settled down and really getting back into kind of steady, normal training without packing a suitcase and moving to a different place every 2 to 7 days as I've been doing for the last 4 months. But before we get to questions, we got a lot to cover. Mr. C, how have you been? I saw you guys a few weeks ago for the holidays, but it's been a while since we last recorded. How are you doing? And are you excited to get back on the old podcast horse here?
Very excited. Yes, it's been great. We had a great holiday season. It was great to see you and your brother and everybody else who came home for the holidays and shared them with us. So it's all been great. Yeah, just been a lot of fun. And now we're actually getting ready to go off to a little beach vacation next week. So it's pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So,
A little midwinter
I'm very
warmth,
excited to
always good.
talk more with you and give our viewers some insights into your training and life in general. So really nice to be back.
Happy.
And
I will say one
go ahead.
One quick little anecdote, because I know you've joked about the fans need you back. I will say, we were hiking on Ruku a week or two ago and ran into some guy who was like, "Oh, it's Tyler. When is the podcast coming back?" And I was like, "No, man, just stay tuned." So
We
people
got
want
to
it,
deliver.
we're giving the people what they want.
We got to deliver for our audience. Absolutely.
Yep.
Anyway, so we do have a ton to cover because it's been a while and there's lots going on. So we have everything from your trip to Atacama to running across the Isthmus of Panama to your Everesting treadmill record and your big announcement that you're returning to Mount Everest on the north side this time. So let's dive right in. So let's start with Atacama. So you did what's becoming a traditional and maybe fan favorite trip to the Atacama Desert, which is the high desert in Chile, in December. So it's a Camp Choski trip, and you had a full group there for a couple of weeks, 10 days, a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us what that was like from being a guide from your perspective. What were the highlights and how did it feel to guide people and share this place that I know has become pretty special to you?
It's funny because I was listening to our last episode right before this to kind of brush up on where we had left off. And the last time we recorded, I was in the Atacama right before the group was arriving. I was like, oh my gosh, this seems like so long ago. So I've been so many places and so many things had happened. But yeah, that was, like you said, it's becoming an annual trip, a favorite part of my year, hopefully a favorite part of a lot of people's year who have come and some people who have come back like Connor and Scott. And it's truly a remarkable place. We talked a lot more about it last time because I was literally sitting in my car in the middle of the desert when we recorded. But it is one of my favorite places on earth. It's just absolutely wild. It's barren. It's a harsh environment, but it's beautiful. It's otherworldly. And I think it creates a really unique space for a group of people to come together and get really close really quickly, because unlike some of the other trips I've led, whether it was in Japan or here in Ecuador or in Peru, where you're kind of maybe based in a city, you have a hotel, everyone has their own room. In the Atacama, it's much, much closer quarters. We're in cars a lot together. We're in, one big room basically with a bunch of bunk beds at the refugio. Everybody gets to know each other real quick. There's no hiding or anything. And this trip in particular was fantastic because I think everybody just got along really well. It was a really good group of people.
Nice.
Really, everybody seemed to respond well to the altitude. And overall, it was just, it's a fantastic time. I really enjoy that part of my life as athlete, coach, guide, being able to take a step back kind of during my off season away from my own goals and priorities and focus on other people's experience in this place that has been so meaningful to me. And I think the feedback we got was fantastic. And now we're already looking to doing the same trip again in 2026 and talking to people about that. So it was a fantastic way to kind of wrap up my off-season time, focus on some other people, and like we're going to talk about, then it was kind of thrown into the into the meat grinder a little bit for like the next week with the Panama run and the Everesting run. And luckily, then I kind of took a week off around the holidays. But yeah, it was a really really fun trip, fantastic group of people, and yeah, can't wait to go back there.
Okay. Well, yeah, it sounds like a great trip, and hopefully all the participants had a great time as well. And then from there, you pretty much literally like what, a day later or something, or even that day, you went right to Panama. And for those who are geographically challenged, Panama is in Central America, and there's a part of it which is surprising. I'll talk about it in a second, but it's got a very thin band at one point that connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In fact, that's of course why the Panama Canal was built there, because it's pretty much the thinnest stretch of land between the two oceans. And it twists almost in a hook, like a fish hook. And so actually, even though you were running Pacific to Atlantic, you were actually running east to west, as I recall, more north to south.
Yeah, it's more north and south basically.
But it's unusual because people always think, well, if you're going from Atlantic to Pacific or Pacific to Atlantic, you're either going east to west or west to east, but it's really almost the same and north to south because of this big hook.
Yep.
But anyway, so you went there with your friend David to literally run this isthmus from one ocean to the other, which is about 50 miles, and talk about a change in location. So in the Atacama Desert, you're on average, what, between 10 and 20,000 feet above sea level. And I can tell you because in my book, just to make a shameless plug, A Brief History of a Perfect Future, which you can find on Amazon with the other 5 people who bought it. We talked about the Atacama Desert because we talked about water and getting water out of humidity and such. And so I know, in fact, because of that research, it's the driest place on Earth, literally the
Yep.
driest place on Earth. And you went from there to Panama, which is one of the wetter places on Earth, very humid, very tropical, and mostly flat. So about sea level. So about a dramatic location change as you can get. And so tell us a little bit, what was that like? It's a 50-mile run, which for you is jog in the park.
Not exactly.
And what made you decide to do it? And also, what made you decide to do it in the same week as you were going to do your big treadmill Everesting attempt just a few days before it?
So a little bit of context here. This run had kind of been in the back of my mind for many many years as a very cool aesthetic thing to do. I'm a sucker for the idea of running projects that are they're naturally aesthetic. They go from one obvious place to another. They run around some big landmark, things like that. I really enjoy those kind of projects from a kind of theoretical standpoint. Sometimes in practice they're less fun, but they definitely there's that appeal to me. And so the Panama one, I honestly feel like my oldest friend David Wilder and I were talking about this like in high school as a thing of like, oh, that's cool because it's like the shortest way that you could connect the two oceans would be to run across Panama. And at that time, we were running 5 kilometers, and that was our race. And so 50 miles seemed like totally outrageous. And then in the last few years, it was like, you know what? Yeah, that sounds cool. It's probably, it's hard, but it's something that we could do that I could do like with a friend or two, like basically at any point. And it was actually a different friend, David, who I was guiding around Japan back in October, and he and I were kind of like talking about brainstorming projects, kind of dream projects. And I mentioned this one, and he was like, "That sounds awesome. Do it together." And I was like, "Sure." I mean, I often fly through Panama City on the way to or from South America. So like basically anytime you want to do it, I'll just add a day of my layover, and we can, from the United States, it's very quick. We can make that like a 2-day thing. And so we decided, okay, let's do it on the way back from your trip to Chile in December. And originally the plan was that I would do that, basically finish the trip, go do that run, and then go back to Boston, have the holidays, and then we were going to do this big Everesting treadmill run like the week after the holidays before New Year's. But for a variety of reasons, La Sportiva, who was hosting the event, they wanted to do it the weekend before the holidays, which makes sense. People are still doing their holiday shopping. It was in their store, etc. I get that. So instead of having like 10 days between the events, we had 3 days between the events. And that was definitely not part of the plan. So it's not like we wrote that out originally. That was a it was a bug, not a feature. And it ended up being a pretty intense back-to-back couple of efforts to do, basically 2 8 to 10 hour projects within 4 days on different continents in very different climates and styles, as you can imagine. And also then factoring in that I had been up at 22,000 something feet on Ojos del Salado just a couple days before that. So it was a very, very big week. But it was, yeah, it was one of these projects that I had always wanted to do and just kind of was waiting for the right time and the right person to do it with. And yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I wouldn't say that the route is something that is fantastic and that I would repeat. It's honestly a lot of running on the side of a pretty busy road. It's
Mm,
pretty cool to run from one ocean to the other aesthetically and like run across the entire country. I think that's pretty rad, but the route itself was not my favorite thing. There was a lot of traffic. Luckily, we left at like 2 o'clock in the morning, so we got a handful of hours before the sun rose and before there was too much traffic. But then, like you said, just the difference in climate between the sun and the Atacama, which can be brutal, but is extremely dry and it's much cooler. And then you get to Panama, which is one of the most humid, brutal places on Earth in terms of heat and humidity and sunshine. We both just got absolutely roasted for like the last 4 or 5 hours. So it was a lot harder than I expected, and we did it, which is great. But it also I was kind of amazed that my body was able to rebound quickly enough from that, and then be able to be ready to go again 4 days later. So overall, fantastic experience, amazing trip. Panama's an awesome country. We saw some cool animals. We saw sloth, wild sloth hanging from a tree on the side
wow.
of the road. We saw a lot of parrots. We saw a humongous crocodile that was like
Cool.
3 feet from the sidewalk, just like sitting in a creek somewhere. So really
Yikes.
cool, just ability to see everything from Panama City, which is super urban, modern looking, to roads through the jungle, to then going through some small towns and getting to Cologne on the other side, which is a more colonial kind of looking city. Very, very cool to see all that and do it all. But, I wish that there were like a bike path or even just, a better shoulder on that road, and it would make it a lot more pleasant. And I would say people should go do it. But right now it's like, yeah, maybe there's a better route that someone could do. We just kind of scouted out the most direct one.
Well, it sounds exciting, especially seeing a big crocodile but also seeing the parrots and the sloth. That was very cool.
Yeah,
And things that you don't normally see, at least for us in the US, just walking down the street.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So from there, you went right to the next big event, which was in Boulder, Colorado, and is called Everesting, in which you conquer the number of vertical meters from ground level, sea level, to the top of Mount Everest. 8828, is it?
48. Yeah.
8828?
88, 48.
8,848 meters. But you
Yep.
do it on a treadmill, an
Yep.
inclined tread, or some kind of device that has some sort of vertical ascent to it. So,
Mhm.
so you've been planning this event it was going to be at the La Sportiva store in Boulder, which is their flagship store in the United States. You had practiced this back in November at your friend's house with the same treadmill that you would be using for this event. And then I remember because I flew out in the middle of it, much to my chagrin, because it delayed everything. And I thought, in fact, I might not even get out there because the weather was so bad. It was an incredible windstorm.
Mhm.
And as it was explained to me, Boulder is on the east side of a range of mountains that act like a funnel. And
Yep.
so when the wind blows really hard, it goes through the mountains and over the mountains. And both of these effects, for those of you who can remember your physics, accelerate the wind quite a bit. And so the wind was absolutely massive, and power lines were down, lots of damage. Most of Boulder had no electricity at that point, including
Yep.
the La Sportiva store. So walk us through what
Yep.
was happening in the days, because you got there a couple of days ahead of all this. So tell us about
Mhm.
what it was like when you first got there and how you navigated this, and how close it was to having to be called off.
So going into this event, I knew that, well, I thought that the hardest part was going to be the recovery between these two humongous efforts, between Panama on Wednesday and this event on Sunday. So I had 3 days in between to recover, including a day of traveling back to the United States. And then I get back to the United States, and literally my buddy and I were in the airport, and we're getting texts from his wife that are like, there's no power in our house. There's no power in Boulder. We're going to a friend's house because they have a 3-year-old to have somewhere with power. They didn't even have running water at their house because their running water was powered by the electrical grid. So we were kind of flying back, and I was like, oh gosh, like maybe this is actually going to be the bigger problem. Like my body actually felt okay, but maybe this is going to be a bigger issue. And, you know, all I can say is, this is why I have such a fantastic team between you and my friends in Colorado and the La Sportiva team and the crew of people that we had out there supporting me. It was incredibly helpful because I honestly didn't have to stress out about it too much because everyone else was on top of it. My buddy has had an electric truck and was even like, hey, worst case scenario, I'll bring my truck down and we'll just run it off the truck for 9 hours or something, the treadmill.
That's right. I remember that now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Hmm.
we kind of had backup plans, and mostly, again, I was just able to kind of focus on recovery of my body and making sure that I was ready to go and these other things. But definitely, like, I am a control freak, as you know, and so there was a lot of me that was like, oh gosh, like what if this happens? What if that? Like what if we don't get power back? And I mean, like people don't have power in their homes, so like this is kind of a trivial thing at the end of the day, but. I do remember, we had a public fun run the day before at the La Sportiva store with a bunch of wonderful people who showed up and we all went running together. And after that, we were supposed to do a dress rehearsal at the store where we were going to test the cameras and the live tracking system and the treadmill itself. And there was still no power. And this was like less than 24 hours to go. And that was a little
Yep.
bit stressful. And just like, okay. And I think
Yeah.
eventually, like, there was like, for some reason, there was power like in one random room in the store. And so we were like run an extension cord and at least make sure that stuff was working. But yeah, it was touch and go there for a while. And, you know, it is what it is. Sometimes that's how these big events go is, the thing that you're worried about is not the thing that ends up being an issue in the end. And all told, it was fine. The power, it's funny because like if it had been 24 hours earlier, it would have been a really big problem. But the fact that it was on Sunday instead of Saturday, which that worked out well, both for my recovery and the power situation. And in the end, it was all good and we had a great event. And we'll talk more
Yeah.
about that later. But it definitely was a little bit of a crazy lead in, and a little bit maybe distracting from like how sore my body was, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, it was interesting because as one of the many engineers in the room at the time, it was weird because half the store had power. So it's
Mm,
kind of the back half of the store had power, but the front half didn't. And the front half was where the treadmill was plugged in. So there was no power at the treadmill. But, I could see the lights were on in these other rooms. So I just went in there and hey, there's plugs in here. In the worst case, we can go
yeah,
buy some long extension cords and plug things in here. And we ended up even trying that out, as I recall, during that trial after the fun run, just to show ourselves, okay, in the worst case, we can survive this process. So that was good. But it
yeah,
was weird that's, how random it was. They're probably just on different parts of the Boulder grid for whatever
right.
reason that building was split and they had either it had never gone out or they had repaired one side, but they hadn't gotten to the other side. And as you said, the good news is by the time the event itself came around, they had repaired the other side as well. And we actually had full power. So, yeah, but it was certainly not feeling all that comfortable with
Yeah.
less than 24 hours to go.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about the event itself. So that was the big day finally came, December 21st. You were all set up in the La Sportiva store there in Boulder at the treadmill, which by the way, shout out to Boulder. I've been to Denver a few times on business, never been to Boulder. It's a beautiful, beautiful town, beautiful city. Weather was great. I mean, I was walking
Yeah.
around in shirt sleeves on December 20th. Big shout out and shameless plug for Boulder. If you have any interest, you should check it out. It's a great spot. Anyway, so
Yes.
La Sportiva, you're in there, you're all set up. You've got, mounds of nutrition for this enormous effort, and people could come watch. And we had a live stream going that your friend Brett from Boston helped set up, and we were running there with Connor in the store. Lots of people there in the store, and people could come into the store and watch. And it was interesting. A lot of people did come into the store and watch. So take us through this whole little minor circus in Boulder here because it was kind of fun. And how did the actual for us it was kind of fun being spectators because we weren't running 8,848 meters uphill on a treadmill. Take us through the actual attempt. How did it go compared to your dress rehearsal? What surprised you about doing this as a public event versus that solo session you had weeks earlier in a garage?
I think well, it's funny what you just kind of mentioned about how nice the weather was actually one of the things that surprised me the most and actually ended up being kind of one of the hardest parts of the day was so I was in this big glass window, as you remember, kind of right in the front of the
Yep.
store. And it's
Yeah,
December
I do.
21st. It's literally this winter solstice. And I never once thought about the fact that I would be like dramatically overheating. We had fans and everything, and that ended up kind of being the real crux. Was after, I don't know, I think we started at 6 or 7. It was like almost dark
Yeah,
when we
around 7
started.
a.m. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess 7 a.m. we started, and by 8:30, 9 o'clock, I was getting absolutely pelted by the sun. I actually got sunburned on half my body. I think I'm like the only person who's ever gotten sunburned from a treadmill run. Like, I got sunburned on the whole left side of my body because I was in this big
That's
window, and
interesting
it
because you were
it
behind a big plate glass window, which you would think would it must have been very intense because you would think that would,
yeah,
screen out most of the UV.
yeah, but anyways, that window was kind of, like, acting like a magnifying glass. I felt like an ant under a magnifying glass, and so despite all the fans and, you guys were super supportive with ice and, cold compresses and stuff, that was really the crux for me, in addition to the just kind of repetitive motion and foot pain and general fatigue that we talked about at the Staley's house. When I did it at their house up in Conifer, I literally did it with the garage door open and it was like 38 degrees outside.
Mm.
And that so the I don't even think I turned the fan on that day. And usually fans are really critical for treadmill because you kind of generate this heat bubble of warm air right around your body. And if you don't have a convective cooling, like something moving the air, it can become very uncomfortable, even if it's pretty cool out. But it was cold enough that I just kept the garage door open. And yeah, it was like in the 30s and 40s up there, and that was no problem. Whereas this time, we definitely opened the door somewhat. We had the fans, we had ice and stuff, but that was the thing for sure. My heart rate got way jacked up way earlier than I expected. And I think that made it a lot harder from a cardiovascular perspective of just looking at the data in retrospect. Actually, someone just sent me a message about this a couple of days ago. And so I was looking at the data again. It's like I was moving. The idea was to basically spend as much time in zone two as possible. And I
Yeah.
was in zone three within like 2 hours and then never
Wow.
went below that. So I spent like 6 to 7 hours in like zone three, zone four, basically, which was a little bit concerning at the time because I remember I would kind of like go back and forth between running and walking a little bit, almost doing like a kind of fart like thing or some intervals just to mix up the motion a little. And once I
Yeah.
start running it, my heart rate was like, it was like I was running a marathon or even a half marathon, and I had like 3 or 4 hours to go, and I'm like, this is not sustainable. That's not good. So that was the part that was really hard, was just managing this kind of thermal load that my body was dealing with that I wasn't really expecting. Maybe there was some leftover fatigue as well from Panama run, but other than that, it was pretty much what I expected from a physical standpoint. I think from a overall experience, doing it with a bunch of people is way more fun than doing it in my friend's garage by myself. We had, I don't know, 6 or 7 people that had come in for the event from out of state, who were friends and family, and that was really special to just be able to do something like that with people around the whole time. And you guys have talked about a lot that running, and especially super long distance running, is like the worst spectator sport ever because basically,
Yeah.
I go run 100 miles and you see me for like a grand total of 5 minutes over 20 hours or something. It's really not that interesting. I pop in and I'm like in a rush and then I pop out again and that's it. Whereas here, especially at the beginning when things feel really easy and comfortable, I was literally just like talking to you guys for like the first hour or two and
Yeah.
just kind of like catching up with my friends and stuff. And that's a great way to kind of just distract the mind a little bit from the effort that's to come, as well as just keep it fun, keep it light, all that stuff. And then having people there the whole time to encourage you and cheer you on, especially when it got really, really hard in the last hour or two. That was really special. Just, yeah, being able to do something, do my thing basically in front of you, in front of a bunch of really close friends, being able to celebrate together afterwards. It's just, yeah, that's the part that's really special to me, is being able to share that with people who are so important to me.
Yep. Yeah. It was fun. It was much more fun than, as you said, a normal race where we kind of see you at the beginning and maybe once or something in the middle and then at the end. And it was fun to be able to see how you were doing. It's a little scary at points, as you said, because I remember literally dumping ice water on you because we could see how hot you were getting. And we even, as I recall, stuck like a little block up.
Mm.
And we tried to put like, fake
Yeah, that was
curtains
clutch.
up in the
Yep.
window to try and give you a little bit of
Yep.
relief from the sun. And I
Yep.
I do remember, taking a couple of breaks and going out to get some lunch and some coffee and just man, it's just amazing that it's December 21st and I'm walking around
Yep.
like this. So
Yep.
was much warmer, I think, than they are normally used to. Um, okay, so back to the event itself. So you did finish barely.
I
Well,
did,
I
yeah.
don't know about barely. You did finish.
Yeah.
8 hours and 17 minutes. So you kind of destroyed the old record of which was around 12 hours, as well as the incline trainer record, which was 8 hours and 56 minutes. So you beat both of those pretty handily. And
Yeah.
in the immediate aftermath, you're getting off the treadmill. You've just climbed 8,848 meters. What's going through your head? I mean, how are you feeling? I remember you pretty much collapsed, and I had to make an emergency trip with you. Well, you can talk about it if you want.
Yeah.
I won't go into the gory details, but it was clearly a hard effort.
Yeah, it was way harder than I expected. And I guess to caveat that, the two records that we talked about, there was I would consider it like a normal treadmill record is 12 hours, which I can't remember the gentleman's name, but someone had done that maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And then there was a guy who did a record on an incline trainer, which is a special kind of treadmill that goes incredibly steep. So this one went to 40%. And that was a promo for this treadmill company that this guy did. And he did an 856. And when you think about it, we were working at 20%, which a lot of treadmills, most like standard gym
20%
treadmills,
elevation, 20% incline, you mean?
yeah, 20% incline. If you go to a normal gym, most treadmills either max out at 15 or 20%. That's pretty standard. 40% is incredibly steep for a treadmill. That's a very specialized machine. And the difference between 20% and 40% is half of the horizontal distance. So it's a way, way, way easier mark if you're good at moving uphill.
Yep.
Because we went almost 50 kilometers. What is it? It's 45K, right? Yeah. To go 8,900 meters. So we went 45 kilometers. So instead of going 45 kilometers, you're only going 22 and a half kilometers, 14 miles, which is a humongous difference in terms of how long that's going to take. So I kind of want to, this is like one of those things where like, women have to forget about their pregnancy and it's they're in childbirth. It's like, yeah, now maybe I could do it on the incline trainer next time. That'd be fun. See how low you could get it. But anyways, um, in terms of the aftermath and everything, I was incredibly sore and feeling very ill for I think like 30 or 60 minutes. I don't know. I know I like went down and laid down in the bathroom at the Los Sportiva store with you and Connor for a while and just was like waiting for my feet to stop throbbing and like everything to stop feeling so bad.
Yep. I think the
And
phrase you use is it feels like somebody's pounding a ball peen hammer into the bottom of my feet.
yeah, it sounds about right. It was really bad. Yeah, that repetitive motion. I've never done anything quite like that, where you're doing exactly the same motion over and over and over again, like landing in exactly the same spot on your feet. I think that was really the hardest part from a physical perspective, other than the heat that we talked about. You're taking, I don't know what that would be, maybe 50,000 steps or something, and you're landing in exactly the same spot on your foot every single time. I would not recommend it. It's really, really hard on your feet and feels incredibly bad. But yeah, within, I don't know, half an hour, 60 minutes or so, I was feeling pretty good. And luckily there were a lot of people who had stuck around in the store that I was able to go out and talk to and meet. Cause those last 2 or 3 hours, I wasn't doing a lot of talking to anybody, but there were a lot of people who, kind of friends and acquaintances that I knew from the Colorado area who had come in, as well as just like random strangers who had stumbled into the store either because they'd heard about it or because they just wanted to buy a pair of shoes and then like found this crazy event. And we're like, what the heck is this guy doing? And it was really cool to talk to some of those people and just get to um, hear their stories a little bit and get some, answer some questions from them and all that. So it was a really fun little aftermath. And then, yeah, it's weird because within a few hours, I was actually feeling pretty good. And I remember we went out and like, we got a bunch of sushi takeout for our whole little squad and, hung out at the hotel and we're staying up late chatting and stuff. So it was a really great night eventually, but my goodness, yeah, my feet, my body were just absolutely trashed after that. And, luckily then I was heading back with you and Connor to the East Coast and basically got spoiled by my mother and like eating Christmas cookies and stuff for a week. So it was a good recovery period.
Especially after these three events right in a row. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. We did meet a whole lot of interesting people right there at the end. In fact, I remember the fellow who came in and said he had been the first person to
Hmm.
do this in the United States or something, right?
Yeah,
To
he
do an
basically,
Everesting.
yeah, I have his card somewhere. I can't remember exactly what his name was, but he essentially said he kind of came up with the idea and did it first. Must have been in his 60s, and this would have been a while ago. But this idea of climbing the height of Everest as a challenge, and I think he'd originally done it on a hill, but I think he had also done it on a treadmill at some point. Because
Yeah.
I was like, God, I wonder how many people have ever done this. This is totally, totally nuts.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Exactly.
Like the people who
Small
pop into
world.
this, especially in Boulder, which is a very, as you said, well, but you didn't mention this, but it is a very outdoorsy town. It's a very
Yeah.
active town, mountainy town. So people really kind of understand the context of this and running and mountain stuff. And it's an educated populace, which is fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now the last thing here on this, let's talk about the fundraising. So this whole event was a fundraiser for the Choski Foundation. So how much did you end up raising? And what does that money actually do? How do you put it to use for the youth athletic programs that you're supporting in Nepal and Ecuador?
So I was actually just finalizing this in this past week. So we raised, I think about $20,000, which is fantastic.
Awesome.
And we are putting that money towards these two programs. So one of them is here in Ecuador, where I am. It's a youth trail running group in Mindo, where you've actually been, which is about two
Yeah.
hours from Quito. It's a small town. And so that's a group, I think there's 7 athletes there that we're going to support. And then there's another group in Nepal in the Khumbu Valley that we're supporting, and that's about 12 athletes. So overall, almost 20 people. And then I think we have maybe 5 or 6 others that are kind of just random people who applied for scholarships for coaching and support from around the world. So overall, we have about 25 people that we're supporting. We have the 2 big groups in Nepal and Ecuador, and those guys, we're going to do kind of a pilot program for them for kind of 6 to 12 months to see how that goes and see how we can support them. Both of them have an in-person coach who's going to basically be handling day-to-day stuff, actually meeting with people in person, holding practices, things like that. And then that person will be working with either me or another coach on the Choski staff for kind of the programming side, writing training plans, strength training, that kind of stuff to support these athletes. And then the idea is also hopefully that we can get some gear, whether it's from Sportiva and other companies, things like that, that we can get down here to Ecuador or over to Nepal to support them that way as well. Super successful. We kind of have enough funding now that we can launch these programs in kind of the guinea pig stage and see how it goes and what we learn in the first 6 to 12 months. And hopefully this becomes something that we can continue kind of indefinitely and help grow and help develop sport in these areas as a, just way for people to get outside and empower themselves and connect with nature and all the good stuff that we love to do with sport.
Awesome. That sounds fantastic. So, and you can donate anytime. So another shameless plug, donate to the Choski Foundation if you feel the urge.
Yeah, no, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah, we will almost certainly do another big round of fundraising, probably every quarter, every 6 months, just to try and make sure that these programs have enough funding to keep going. And so the next one will probably be with the real Everest, which I know we're about to talk about. Yeah, if you are hearing this and haven't donated yet and want to support it, through this treadmill thing, you can still do that. We'll have the link in our show notes, put it on social media and stuff as well. So thank you guys so much to everybody who's donated. It makes a huge difference. And we are super excited about keeping this going.
Great. Okay. So speaking of the real Everest, let's talk about it. So
Yep.
you've climbed the height of Everest on a treadmill at incline, and you've been to the actual Mount Everest, which most people haven't, but you've been there actually twice in the last year, where you
Yep.
attempted the summit a few times but didn't make it. And as you're on the treadmill grinding through all those hours, were you thinking about the real Everest? And how do these two very different Everests compare from your perspective?
So someone asked me a similar question in an interview a couple weeks ago, and it's basically they're similar, kind of in name only.
Yeah, I would think so.
They're yes, they both involve a lot of moving uphill, but the things that make the real Everest hard and the things that make Everesting on a treadmill hard are totally different. Like we talked about, it was, thermal regulation and this like weird foot pain from taking the exact same steps. Those are the things that make the treadmill thing hard. Also, just like the monotony, the mental fatigue. We didn't even really touch on that, but the idea that, you're just there, not moving at all, like in space. That's that issue on the treadmilling side. Whereas
Yeah.
for the real Everest, like we've talked about a lot, there's so many things that make it hard. It's the altitude, the hypoxia, it's the weather, it's the crowds, it's the terrain, it's the avalanche danger, it's the crevasse danger, it's your gear, it's fueling at those really high altitudes, all of those things that have nothing to do with treadmill stuff. So, yes, I was already thinking about it in the sense that this was kind of the end of this kind of transitionary fall base period, little mini season, whatever you want to call it, was
Uh-huh.
this event. So I was thinking, okay, this is like the last big hard thing I have to do. And then I'm going to kind of take a break for a little bit and then start building up to the real Everest. And it was a good fitness challenge. And I felt really good about how my body performed and all these things. But in the same method, other than the fact that it's like a big cardiovascular challenge, it didn't feel particularly indicative of, it's not like I did this. I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, now I could definitely go to Everest. I think coming down here to Quito now, it's much more here. I have a much better benchmark of, okay, if I can do these things in the mountains here and feel comfortable on the glaciers and all that stuff, that's what makes me feel really confident for going back to Everest. But it was more just, okay, this is kind of the end of one little season and it's about to be the beginning of the next one. And that's the road to to the actual, the actual time.
Yeah. Yeah. I would think so. Just the difference in altitude is an enormous distinction between the two events. And the
Yep.
fact that you're out in snow and cold and freezing and just all sorts of stuff.
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about your next attempt and your announcement of attempting to go up the north side. So
Yep.
for people who don't, again, are geographically challenged, Nepal is the south side
Yep.
attempt and Tibet is the north side. So,
That's right.
so talk us through what is it that made you decide to go on the north side versus the south side, and why you're still wanting to do this after your previous less successful attempts.
That was a generous way to put that. Less successful. The funny thing is that
Well,
we are
most people never even get near Everest, and you got over
sure.
8,000 meters multiple times, so
Sure.
it's not
Yeah, that's
nothing.
fair. No, it's not nothing. It's what is the expression about, close only counts in what is it? Bocce and hand grenades. I can't remember what it
Hand
is, but
grenades, right?
yeah. Anyway, so the funny thing is that the north side was actually where we were originally supposed to climb. I don't know if you remember this, Mr. C, but when we were originally scheming this
I
project
do.
with Carl Egloff and me and the film crew and everybody, production company back in like 2023, we were talking about going on the north side. And eventually we ended up pivoting because the north side had been closed since COVID for like 3 or 4 years at that point. And I think the year before we were going to go was the first year they opened, but it was like very, very limited in terms of who could go. And with a really big film crew and all these fancy permits, basically the production company kind of got in terms of that side of the mountain. They were just really nervous that they were going to have all this infrastructure in place, invest all this money, and then at the last minute end up, you know, basically getting stuck, not being able
Yeah.
to either go in at the right time or at all, or having a bunch of people's permits get rejected, or just having maybe they'd say, oh, the climbers can go, but the film crew can't. And that is I would say the more complicated thing with the north side is the permitting process is just a little bit more opaque. There's not quite as much transparency about who's going to get permitted, who's not, what the rules will be on the mountain, et cetera. Those things sometimes change from year to year. And so that was why we pivoted to the south side, and why, I was on Lhotse in 2024 and then Everest twice in 2025 to prepare for the south side. All that to say, in my opinion, the north side was always the side that I would have been happier on. It's objectively much safer. The really big difference, I was just reading I've been studying up on this, and I was reading an article that was kind of walking through the north side and had some quotes from this guy Adrian Ballinger, who's a friend of mine and runs a trekking company or a climbing company that operates entirely on the north side of the mountain, really succinctly, which is essentially that the south side, the Nepal side, which is where we've been climbing, is a route that follows valleys. And the north side is a route that follows ridges. And the difference is when you're in a valley, everything is above you and can fall onto you, whether that's rockfall or avalanches or seracs collapsing. Whereas when you're on a ridge, you are the highest thing and things fall away from you. So that's really the biggest difference
Uh-huh.
objectively in the safety side is most of the danger that I think about in the mountains that's uncontrollable danger up there on Everest and other 8,000ers is stuff falling on top of you. It's avalanches, it's serac collapses, it's rockfall. Obviously people have issues with altitude as well and get HAPE and HACE and things like that. That's a really big problem. By hypothermia, those things are also all problems. But for me, the most uncontrollable things are those issues of if there's 10,000 feet of mountain above you and some of it just falls down, you're going to have a pretty bad day usually. So that's the really big difference is there's almost no avalanche overhead danger on the north side. The other thing that's nice about the north side for me actually is that it's much longer. It has a much longer approach. It's more kind of like trail running, which suits me. The first, I think, from the first base camp to on the north side, they have base camp and they have advanced base camp instead of like camp one, camp two. So from base camp to advanced base camp is almost 25 kilometers, and it's pretty runnable. It looks like from the trail, from the pictures and videos I've seen. It's not very steep. It's all on kind of rocky trails and stuff. So you kind of start out with this like 25-kilometer trail run, and then you kind of start climbing up a lot more. And so that's something that's just interesting to me because it fits more into my background. It feels more kind of like in Aconcagua, where you have the long approach that's kind of flat, and then you have to do the climbing after that. And I kind of like that mix of skills. I mean, I think it suits my skill set a lot. And then the third thing I would say is the gentleman who has it is a man named Kilian Jornet, who is objectively, probably in the top two or three greatest trail runners, certainly of my generation, if not of all time. He set the record in, gosh, it was before COVID, maybe like 2018 or something, from base camp to summit in 26 hours. So it's a much longer record, like I said, but he's the guy in trail running. As much as Carl Egloff was kind of the guy in the big mountain speed stuff, he was breaking some of Kilian's big mountain speed records, like on Aconcagua and Kilimanjaro, which I then later broke Carl's. Kilian is just such an accomplished athlete, and he's a very, very big name in the sport. And to me, that makes it really exciting. I'm very motivated by competition, and I want to be competing on the highest possible stage. And when I know that I'm going up against one of the greatest of all time in the sport that I'm competing in, like that to me is even more motivating. So that's really exciting about the north side. Oh, actually, you know what? Fourth, I'll throw one more thing in there for the north side is it's way less crowded. I think like between usually 3 and 5 times as many permits issued on the south side. So you're talking about what is that, like 20 to 30% of the people would be on the north side versus the south. And there's, I think, also just fewer pinch points. So it makes that navigational and timing side a lot easier. But safer. It's a cooler, longer route, in my opinion. It's a more prestigious record because of who has it, and way fewer crowds on that side. And I guess the last thing I'll say about it for me personally is, I had spent basically the last year training for and being on Everest on the south side. And especially in the last season, I had a really scary fall into a crevasse when I was solo. That was really not that cool. I had a lot of close calls with avalanches, and I was just kind of not like super motivated to go back there. Honestly, the Khumbu Icefall is really scary. The route is really hard and complicated with the crowds and pinch points and stuff like that, and timing and all these things. And if you told me in 3 months that the Tibet side was closed and I had to go back to the south side, I think I could get my head around it. But it felt a lot more exciting and motivating to me to have, it's kind of the same project, it's the same mountain, but it's a completely different side. It's completely different. It's a different country. It's a different environment over there. It's a different aesthetic. Everything looks different because you're on the Tibet side versus the Nepal side. So it does feel just exciting in a way that I think if I imagine going back to the south side, I mostly feel dread. Honestly, I don't feel a lot of positivity about that. And when I think about the south side, I'm mostly right now I'm feeling excited, which is when you have a project of this magnitude it's so hard, it's so big, it's so scary and dangerous at a level, you need to be really excited about it, I think, for it to go well. So that's a big part of the north side to me, is just trying to keep this as something that it's been a multi-year project at this point. I've been thinking about this for, really since 2023. So this is like the 4th year that we've been working towards this project, and you really need to be into it. You need to love it to feel really passionate about it in order for to make it work. And I think that pivoting to the north side is a big part of that for me.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that all the bureaucracy cooperates, and we'll look forward to reviewing your training and eventually getting there in April and May.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after all that craziness in Chile and Panama and Boulder, you came here. And while you were here, you had some interesting lab testing done, some very extensive lab testing at a place called Human Powered Health, who has as one of its key advisors Inigo, whose last name I can't even remember, but he's super famous coach, fitness coach and
Okay.
cycling coach. And I was able to actually go with you and witness some of this. It's really very cool. Lots of high tech testing, including lactate testing, VO2 max testing, gait assessment, strength assessment, all sorts of different things. So what did you learn from these tests, and what do you take away from that and the assessment, and how are you using that data to inform your training going forward?
So first of all, yeah, it's Dr. Inigo San Milan, and
San
he's a
Milan, that's it.
physiologist. Yep. And really well-known guy in the elite sport world. I think he's probably most famous now for coaching, I think it's the UAE Tour de France cycling team, which I believe is home to Pogacar. It's a hard name to say, but who is, by far the greatest Tour de France cyclist of all time based on numbers. And I'm a super fair weather, like I don't watch a lot of Tour de France, but from the little bit I've read, he seems to be certainly one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest of all time. And he's kind of famous as the pioneer of zone two training and how it impacts mitochondrial development and things like that. And we were actually talking right before we started recording. He's done a lot of scientific research about looking
This
at
is
populations.
Inigo San Milan you're talking about
Yeah.
now, not
Yeah.
the
He's
UAE
done a lot
guy.
of
Yep.
research about looking at healthy populations, elite athlete populations, and then diabetic and pre-diabetic populations, and basically looking at metabolism across that spectrum in those three populations and kind of comparing and contrasting. So he's looking at, the people who have some of the best metabolic efficiency in the world, which are elite cyclists and runners and cross-country skiers, and then comparing those to normal population and looking at what he's finding in elite athletes and saying, okay, how can we use this information to help people who are diabetic or pre-diabetic, who have metabolic syndrome, things like that. So, anyways, fascinating guy. There's a really good interview I listened to him with Peter Attia, who's one of these, kind of, I don't know what the right term is, but he's they get really into the weeds. So Peter Attia is obviously a
Well,
very smart guy.
Peter Attia wrote a very famous New York Times bestseller called Outlive. He's a
Okay.
doctor who believes in more holistic doctoring, proactive doctoring, you might call it. And he's not so much a longevity freak, he's a health span freak. So he's
Hmm.
trying to help people live longer and more healthy. And a lot of that is around exercise and physiology. So he ends
Yep.
up talking to a lot of people like Inigo San Milan and others who are experts in strength and fitness because that's such an important part of trying to maintain your health, especially as you get to people like me and my age. Sarcopenia, as it's called, loss of muscle mass, is one of the key issues that leads to declines in health of various types. So that's who
Yep.
Peter Attia is. So anyway, carry on.
Gotcha. Anyway, so there's a great episode. Yeah, if you search his name, or we can try and link it in the show notes if you want to go listen to that. Super smart guy. He's done a lot with lactate measurement, VO2 max. Yeah, like I said, he kind of pioneered the idea of doing a lot of zone two training. Anyways, so he's one of the main advisors at this lab called Human Powered Health. And shout out to my agent, Jim Corville, who hooked me up with them. And they were fantastic. I mean, Mr. C, you were there for maybe like half of the testing. I think I was there for like 8 hours, but they did all kinds of stuff. Everything from, I remember I went in like fasted without caffeine so we could do kind of resting metabolic rate. We did DEXA scan, all this other stuff, and then kind of fueled and did a bunch of metabolic things with gait analysis, lactate threshold, VO2 max, all these different weird balance exercises and force plate things. Like they are one of the highest end sports testing labs in the country. It seems like they work with all kinds of professional sports teams like NFL and NBA teams, as well as marathoning and cycling and stuff like that. So they really know what they're talking about. They sent this really detailed report, and I actually have a follow-up call with the physiologist Evan, as well as Dr. on this coming week to kind of go through that in more detail. One of the things that we've definitely talked about this before is the idea that sometimes like more data is all like too much data can be really overwhelming, and that's a little bit of how I feel. I think Evan did a really good job of putting it into a succinct enough form where it's like, okay, here are the like three things that are incredibly important that you really want to focus on. And for me as an athlete, especially, I've been running competitively for almost 20 years, being able to find things that I can still fix is really helpful. I like that. I'm very grateful to that because it means, okay, there's still meat on the bone. There's ways for me to continue improving even at 35 years old where, other than just kind of like falling into the same rhythms. So, I think the three really big things that we found, one was, uh, kind of the most surprising thing was a low bone density. So that was something that they found in the DEXA scan. And I've been talking with them as well as some other doctors about that. And it's really interesting though, because, and I was actually asking Dr. Claude AI about, like, I had Dr. Claude read the whole report and then asked a bunch of questions because that's a nice way to use AI sometimes when you have a really dense document. And I basically asked the question like, okay, if I have low bone density, why haven't I had a stress fracture in 20 years? Like, why am I able to run 150 miles a week on pavement when I was doing marathons and ultras and not, I should have like 20 stress fractures. And one of the things that Dr. Claude said is, well, bone density is not actually the only metric that matters. There's also basically the structure of your bones, like the actual geometry and architecture of the inner part of the bone. So you could have quite strong bones in the sense of your makeup and architecture, but the density could be low. So that's part of it. Or he was basically like, or maybe you just got lucky. Like maybe you're just driving around without a seatbelt and you haven't gotten in an accident yet. It's like, okay, maybe, you know. So also he was like, you should also do just like do another test. So I'm actually looking for a place here in Quito just to get a second datum because those, the machines are very accurate. They're super high end machines, but even being off by, zero point 0.3 or zero point 0.5 could be pretty significant. So gonna check that out. So that was number one, is bone density stuff. The other was some glute instability. So that's a very common thing in runners is like glute med instability. So you have hip drop basically, which is when, if you're looking at someone straight on and when they plant with one foot, their other hip drops down because they're, the hip of the foot that is planting on the ground isn't strong enough to keep your torso straight. And that's a good way to get hurt. It's a good way to just be inefficient in your mechanics. So that's a big one. So started doing that. And then the other one is still some leftover imbalances in terms of mobility and strength in my ankles and lower legs from the surgery I got 2 years ago on my Achilles. So that's another one where we've kind of put together a really thorough program for both strength and mobility on the ankles that I'm literally doing every day. I think it's probably about 80 minutes that I'll do every single day of this block just to really try and measure that and get it even with the right side. And then with the the glute stuff and the bone density stuff, one of the big things that they recommended is doing a lot of really heavy lifting, which I have not done before to the extent of heaviness that they expected. And I was telling you right before this call, I hired a strength trainer here in Keto who works at the gym that I use down the street. And we had our first session 2 days ago, and I like couldn't stand up and like sit on the toilet. It was like that's how much my glutes were destroyed from this first day. Like I was just lifting so much more weight than I've ever lifted before. And I was kind of joking to Connor. I felt like, the guy who's never gone running before and goes into the gym and just hops on the treadmill. And, they usually have like the walk, jog, run buttons. And it's like, oh, I'll just press the jog button. That's probably fine. Like that's kind of how I've probably treated weightlifting of just like, I didn't know what I was doing or what I was capable of. And all of a sudden you have this guy who's like, so strong. He's like, picking up 25-kilo plates like they're nothing. And he's like, yeah, okay, here, we'll start at, 50 kilos for farmer's carry or whatever. I'm like, oh, sure. Okay. That's like almost my body weight, but okay. And it's that ability to just have someone who knows what they're doing, who can look at you and say, okay, you can do this, this, and this. Even if I personally would be like, no way, there's no way I could do that. And then, oh, actually I can. I'm just incredibly sore for a couple days. And so I think it's going to be a little bit of an interesting transition to getting the body used to those things. But I'm confident that that will be a really big help because I felt incredibly sore, but it felt like a productive kind of soreness, not a bad kind of soreness. It was just, okay, I'm sore in exactly the right places, which is where I know I have a lot of muscle weakness. And that soreness is a reflection of working those things really hard. And then, as we've talked about many times, the idea of anti-fragility, you stress a system and then it grows stronger. So that's the idea is being able to, have a more stable and healthy frame going forward.
Great. Yeah. I had an experience like that in high school. I tried out for my first cross country team in high school. And so I just showed up in my jogging shorts the first day. And they said, okay, follow these guys. And we ran, I don't know, 10, 15 miles that first day.
What? Really?
Yeah. We ran, you know, I, I was lost. I didn't even know where we were. So I couldn't even abandon them and just run back to the high school because I wasn't quite sure where we were. And man, I barely made it back. I mean, I was just dying by the time we got back. And yeah, I was so sore that night. Oh my God. And the next day, but I was young, so I recovered quickly. So that sounds
Indeed.
good. Although I think most of what I've heard is you shouldn't be that sore after you do a heavy workout. So you just be careful that you don't injure yourself.
Yeah. I think it's just the first one,
Hmm.
hopefully.
Okay. Well, good. And that sounds like you got some good information out of it. And in fact, as you're aware, I was so impressed. I talked to the people and we're actually now connected to one of the doctors who does referrals to human performance. So your mother and I are going to go there and get ourselves evaluated and see
Great.
see if they can give us some tips, which we probably will have similar tips certainly about the strength stuff, I'm sure, because
Hmm.
you just tend to lose a lot of bone density as you get older anyway, and you tend
Yeah.
to lose a lot of lean muscle mass and strength. So we'll see what they have to say, but we're excited to get to that. So let's talk about you're back in keto now. Finally, I know you've been looking forward to this and sort of, as you said, not having to be someplace different every few days, living out of a suitcase kind of thing. You're back at
Hmm.
altitude. You're in your comfortable training grounds that you know very well. So after this crazy stretch, between the Atacama Desert, the Isthmus of Panama and the Everesting event in Boulder, Colorado, and all the travel in between and before and after. What's it like to be just, back at your home base and settling into your, as I call it, your monk routine, not the TV show? Although I guess you could because he was kind of OCD, but more the monastery kind of situation.
Yep. It's been wonderful, honestly. The first, 10 or 12 days of the year I was here, there were a bunch of my friends were actually down here. Chris Fisher and his partner were here. Ryan Hall and Sarah Hall were down here. Yeah, a lot of just like seeing friends who have both from here and from abroad who were visiting, and enjoying being out and about in the mountains. I had a friend who we climbed, went to Cayambe, went to Chimborazo, went to Cotopaxi, Rumiñahui. Like, so we just climbed a lot of mountains together. That was great. And eventually settled back in here and finally kind of getting unpacked and installed in my place. Got Carlos the tortoise back. He was being babysat by my physical therapist for the last 4 months. So that's great. He's grown quite a bit. He went from 30 grams to 60 grams in 4 months. So doubled in size, and he's happy and healthy. And yeah, mostly it's really, really nice to be back in what feels like home. I've really enjoyed so much travel in the last 3, 4 months and getting to see so many people in different places, but especially when I'm getting into a really big focused training block, my kind of monk mode, like you said, I like to kind of remove all of the external distractions of traveling and having to repack and everything, and just being able to really focus on being in a routine and being able to do the same kind of training that I've done before with some slight modifications. I think we'll talk about that next, of exactly what those are, but really just focusing on training, focusing on recovery, and just eat, sleep, run. Like, that's kind of the dream, is that's the simplest part of life. And it's a part that I really enjoy, is just putting your nose to the grindstone and focusing and working really, really hard for a few months and getting really fit, and then hopefully going out and doing something really special in the mountains.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear you're settling in and getting into your training. So let's talk about your training. You've now, in the past couple of years, done two of these major training blocks in the lead up to your two previous attempts on Everest. So is this one different? And if so, how from those previous two, both in terms of what you're doing and how your body is responding?
I think this will look more like last year's spring training block. If you remember, the summer block leading into September felt a little bit more rushed, especially at the beginning, because it was just much shorter. I didn't get off of Everest in the spring until like May 20th. And then I didn't really feel good and start training kind of full swing until the end of June. So then July, August, it was really only 3 months versus this is more like 4.5 months. So it allows me to be a lot more patient and a lot more gentle with the ramp up into training over the next, I'll have about 3.5 months here in Quito. And then again, I'll go to Nepal and train on the Nepali side in Kare again. That's kind of become my go-to home base there for these kind of really big mountain training blocks, is spending a few weeks in Kare, which is just about 5,000 meters up, and has Mera Peak, which is about 6,400 at the summit. So really, really great place to train. Wonderful people there who I've gotten to know over the last year, spending a lot of time there. And then, yeah, the only big difference on that after that is, going over to Tibet instead of Nepal, which is a couple days of travel instead of, a 20-minute helicopter ride. So that's a slightly different piece kind of the end of the season. But the benefit of that is, like we talked about before, the north side route is so much safer that I can actually do a lot more training on the mountain itself. So in the past, we've gone over to Everest Base Camp on the south side literally a day or two before we plan to head up the mountain for the FKT and do all of the training in Kare and beforehand. Whereas on Everest, on the north side, we'll be able to go there. And my plan would be to do at least one trip up to 7,500, maybe even as high as 8,000, 8,200 on the mountain before I actually go all the way to the summit. And then, probably spend a week or 10 days there, getting to know the route a little bit more. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. I think it should feel a little bit less rushed overall. And especially that last kind of whirlwind of going from Kare to EBC and then going right up. I think it'll be a lot nicer to have a little bit of a break, a couple days of travel, and then have a week or two at base camp before actually making the summit bid.
Uh-huh. You have to just be careful not to burn yourself out before the real
Right.
attempt, right?
Yep, for sure. And that's why it's a pretty big range. I think, there's the North Col at 7,000 meters on the north side of Everest. That's, I think technically it's camp one because they number their camps really weirdly. So there's base camp, there's advanced base camp, which is like 6,400. And then there's camp one, which is at the North Col, which is 7,000. And then the next camp above that, I want to say is 7, 8. So I think certainly getting to 7,000 is very doable in a day. And then anything above that, even if it's 7.2, 7.4, 7.8, whatever it is, somewhere in that range, I think being able to get up there and then come down and recover really well. That's another, actually, one more thing. I've learned a lot about the EBC North Side or Everest North Side route in the last couple of weeks. And one of the things that's interesting is there's a paved road that goes basically all the way to base camp. So as opposed to having to fly in or take yaks in or hike in, you can actually drive all the way to base camp. And what that also means is you can drive down to a town. I can't remember the name of it, but it's about 30 or 40 kilometers away. So it's less than an hour drive. And
Uh-huh.
it's, I don't know, 1,500 meters lower, 1,000 meters lower. Say lower, they have like actual hotels with like electricity and beds and stuff. So that would be my plan, would
Wow.
be, okay, go up, do that one really high rotation, come down, go spend a couple nights much lower, recover really well down there, and then come back up and do the FKT. I think that's kind of the way I've thought about it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So let's talk about looking forward then beyond obviously the big deal, which is the attempt on Everest North Side. What else are you looking forward to in the next few months? What's exciting to you? You've hinted here and there at some other spring 2026 plans, but haven't made any official announcements. So do you want to tease anything or announce anything? And what can you tell us about what you've got lined up, as we said, other than the attempt on Everest? And what are you most looking forward
Yeah.
to these next few months?
So I'd say twofold. One is what we talked about before of just being able to be in a routine and
Hmm.
feeling like I'm somewhere familiar where I really understand where my fitness is. I think that's something that sometimes stresses me out, is when I just don't have a good sense of how fit I am or how ready I am to do something. Like, I've trained
Sure.
so much here in keto that, I can go do, 2 or 3 sessions on the Choski, and I have a very good sense of how fit I am and exactly what I need to work on and how long that's going to take me. So that's part of it, is just the rhythm and the routine. And then the other side, I think, is just trying to mix things up a little bit and do a couple of races like you mentioned. I haven't 100% decided on exactly what those are going to be. Some of them might be here in Ecuador, some of them might be abroad, but that's the idea, is to kind of mix it up a little bit. So it's not just 3.5 months of, running up and down the Choski every single day, which, as much as I love doing that, and I'm going to do it a lot, I do enjoy mixing things up. I remember all the way back to my build up before Manaslu, I had a really great run at the UTMB Quito race here in Ecuador. And that was, I think, only probably 6 weeks before I made the Manaslu summit. So throwing something like that in, it's maybe not like the most specific thing, in that it's more running, and maybe it's not as much, steep uphill as I'm usually training for. And it's just, that's the only focus. But I think it does just break up the training. It's fun. So doing some races, doing some of the volcano, like the big 5,000 meter plus mountains here in Ecuador, kind of trying to do some FKTs on some of the peaks that I don't already have the records on. I think that mixing some stuff in like that, maybe every, let's say 3 or 4 weeks, I think is something that I'm really excited about. And I definitely have ideas, and that's probably something I'm going to figure out in the next couple of weeks, is exactly which ones of those I'm going to target. And so, yeah, hopefully we'll have something for you guys, either next episode or the episode after that, with actual plans.
Great. Okay. Well, we've been running on here for a while, and this has been great to catch up and review everything. That's the end of my set of questions. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think we're good. Let's cut, and we'll come back for our cool down.
Okay. Welcome to today's cool down. And in the past attempts for Everest, you wrote down your 16 rules, including the first and last: don't be greedy and don't die, which we'll always keep first and foremost. This time you've written down 6 words, and then you did write another 10. I forgot about that for the
That
second
was last season.
time on Everest. This time you wrote just 6 words. So can you walk us through each of these and their meaning to you?
Sure. The first word, well, and I guess before we dive into it, I think I was thinking about, like, do I really even have anything to add? Because, like, I now have 26 things that I've written down
Yeah.
over the last year. Like, the first 16, I think, were much more instructive. Some of them were very specific about kinds of training and workouts that I wanted to do and prioritize, things like that. It was almost more about, like, very specifically how to do the training block. I think the second list was a lot of stuff that I had learned from the first trip up, or from the first expedition, from the first several trips up. And this time, I started. Well, I started with the word stability, which was, and I'll explain that in a second. And then what I ended up with was, it felt almost more like a rubric that I could use to help me with decision making. And the way that I've thought about this is, okay, these are the 6 things that I really want to prioritize. And so when I am making a decision, this season, whether it's what workout to do or whether to hop into some race or join Chris Fisher for some big adventure, then it's about, okay, if I run through each of these things, like, is it increasing or decreasing my each of these? So is it, the things are stability, health, fitness, confidence, joy, and tranquility. Is it going to increase or decrease my stability? Is it going to increase or decrease my health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And that it felt more, it's a broader way to help me make decisions more than like a very instructive list of, these are the point by point things that you have to do, because I still think almost everything that I've written down on that first 16 list item and the 10 follow-up things that I wrote down after the first expedition, I think all those are still incredibly relevant. And this is really more to just help implement those and help me think about decision making. So that said, yeah, let's dive in. So the first word I wrote down is stability. And this was kind of my, I keep a general kind of like life planning calendar list as well. And this was one of the big things I wrote down just for this entire first half of this year, really. And it came because actually Evan, the physiologist at HPH who did the lab testing for us, that was one of the words that he mentioned a lot in a physiological context. Was one of the things that I needed to work on was stability, and the idea of just having a more stable body, that my fitness, my cardiovascular fitness was extremely high. I had nothing to worry about there, but that there was a lot of work that I could do in terms of balance, in terms of strength, in terms of stability to make myself more efficient and less prone to getting hurt. And this was also at a time, we did this right before I came to keto. I think it was literally the day or two before I flew down here, where I'd been living out of a suitcase for the last 4 months, and I felt very ungrounded and unstable in a
Yeah.
general life context. And like I said before, that can be very fun and it can be intense in a good way, in that I'm seeing a ton of different places and people, but at the same time, I don't think it's what I need personally as an athlete and a human when I'm trying to do something really, really hard, like prepare for Everest. So to me, stability is probably the most important. I think the rest are more interchangeable, but the stability one is the most important in the sense that it encapsulates a lot of things. It encapsulates the physical work that I want to do with my body. It encapsulates how I want to structure my life here, and just kind of general, how I want to live and feel more grounded and more stable and more focused, all those things. So that was that's the first one. Yeah,
Okay. Interesting. So stability both physically and mentally and emotionally. So all
exactly.
around stability.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And word number two was health.
Health was one where I was thinking about, okay, what are the things, I kind of almost reverse engineered this, thinking about what are the things that would keep me from being successful in May, that would prevent me from getting the record. And I thought, okay, stability, if like my body completely breaks down or I just like am not able to focus because I'm all over the place and I can't train, that was stability. Health was the next one because I realized, especially in the spring, if I get really sick, it's a humongous problem. And so prioritizing not just health in the sense of training, but health in the sense of staying healthy while I'm here in keto, not getting injured. And also when I'm in Asia, not getting, the 5 days of horrendous diarrhea, or more importantly, the like 5 weeks of like really bad respiratory bug or infection that I've gotten multiple times over there. I think that's one of the most important things, because that is like, it's just such a humongous problem that you get these bugs up in the Khumbu Valley sometimes that just do not go away and they linger, and it's really hard to get over them. And then you kind of get into a vicious cycle of you're stressed out about being sick, you're not performing as well, then maybe you try to overcompensate and you get sicker, and meanwhile your summit window date is looming, and yeah, it's a huge thing. So that was probably the next biggest one, was okay, just if I can manage to just stay healthy, not get sick, not get injured, that's huge.
And what do you do when you're in Asia to try and,
Really good.
prevent that?
So part of it is just not overtraining, is training less and recovering more so that your body is less stressed out. So being more fit going into that period, and then not trying to squeeze so much out of probably those last 3 or 4 weeks. I think that's part of it. And then honestly, it's really simple stuff that like you learn in kindergarten. It's like wash your hands and like don't hang out with a bunch of strangers in enclosed spaces a lot, and
Yeah.
wear a mask when you're traveling. Just like really basic stuff. One big thing that I've been trying to think about and look into is how to get a more like vitamin and nutrition rich diet when I'm up there. I remember one of the things that we found was when we went from Kare down to Lukla, which is, whatever, 2,000 meters lower and is a much bigger town. It's where the airport is. There's this one little breakfast restaurant that made these fruit smoothies. And I remember Dave Wilder and I went down there and we were just like, oh my God, these like fruit smoothies are the best things we've ever tasted after being up in Kare for like 2 weeks. And I think there's something to that your body is just craving fresh fruits and vegetables. And you just don't get that up really high up because everything there has to be carried in by a yak. So, occasionally they have some apples, some cooked like collard greens, spinach, that kind of stuff, potatoes, but there's not a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. So I've been looking at like, okay, is there some kind of powder like I have a thing of blueberry powder or something like that, or dried fruit, something that I can just bring up to get a little bit more of a varied diet up there. But mostly, honestly, it's really simple stuff. It's washing your hands. It's not interacting with many people. It's like just hiding from germs while you're up there, and
Yeah.
then keeping the training balanced.
Vitamins, of course, and supplements too can
Right.
potentially help. Yeah,
Yep.
I'd say dried fruits are pretty easy.
Yep.
And yeah, as a person who traveled a lot in a lot of small planes and other places and had to meet a lot of people, that, be in a lot of in with a lot of strange people in small conference rooms and such in the winter, man, number one rule, just, it kind of destroys your skin at one level, but just wash your hands
Yep.
every time. Wash your hands. Try to avoid these silly rituals like shaking people's hands and
Yep.
stuff like that. Because that is the most common way you get sick is you shake somebody's hand or you touch a surface somewhere and then you rub your eye or your nose and there you go.
Yep. Totally.
Yep. Okay. Third one was fitness.
Yep. I mean, to me, this is almost the easiest one. Obviously, I need to be fit, and that's a priority. And I want to make sure that I prioritize that when I'm making decisions. I don't know if there's that much to say. This is what I do. It's like I
Yeah.
get myself really fit here. So I don't want to be totally hand wavy and woo woo and say, oh, it's all about joy and tranquility and stuff. It's like no, you also have to get really, really, really fit. It's a hugely
Yeah.
important part of it. It's the part that I think I've had the least problem with, but at the same time, it needs to be on this list because that is most of the reason that I'm here in keto is to get really fit for the next 3 months.
Yeah. Well, that's the work, right? It's just,
Yep.
again, when you see any great artist in their prime, what you don't see, you see the output, but you don't see the
Right.
just enormous effort at fitness, you can call it more broadly. So if you're a musician, it's playing, practicing for hours and hours and hours a day. If you're a drawing artist, then, it's the same thing. It's drawing hours and hours every day. And
Mhm.
you don't see that part, but it's essential. It's the homework, as we say. It's the homework and preparation, even if it's just a regular old job. If you have a big
Yep.
presentation, the more you're prepared, the more effort you put in, the better it goes because your fitness for that experience is that much higher. Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay. Number four was confidence.
Confidence is an interesting one because I think it's something where you're almost sometimes, I don't want to say lying to yourself, but you're setting things up in a certain way. And I'll speak more from a fitness side where there are times, especially if my confidence is low, where I will do a certain workout or a certain type of workout or even a workout in a certain place where I know it's just going to go well. And sometimes training is about momentum and mental momentum as much as physical momentum, where if you get kind of in a rut, sometimes you just need to have like 3 or 4 sessions that go well, and you just need to like move the bar a little bit lower, maybe do something different. Maybe you're doing more running and less climbing or something like that. I remember this happened in the summer when I was getting ready for the September season where I think I sprained my ankle or something. And like I did a bunch of training on the treadmill and I was like, oh man, I feel so fit now. Like all my treadmill workouts were going really, really well. And then I was able to get back in the mountains and kind of like got out of a little bit of a rut that way. And so sometimes it's about finding things that are going to make you feel good about where your fitness is, and I think this is the double-edged sword that we've talked about before of training here in keto, where I have so much experience on all these trails. I literally can tell you within 2 minutes on the Choski of how my day is going to go, because like the two little markers in the first 2 minutes. And it's like, I know if I hit it in 2 minutes or if I hit it in 1:45, like that's the difference between it's a really good day or it's kind of an okay day. So it's like, that's the level of precision that I have over there. And so sometimes it's almost helpful to move away from that for like a week and just go do something else where I can just feel good in my fitness and I don't have those points of comparison. It's like, okay, I'm feeling good. I'm moving fast. That's what matters. And it doesn't matter exactly to the second how I compare it to myself from this year or last year. What's more important is, okay, I'm feeling good in training. I'm doing this. Okay, cool. I'm going to go do an FKT. I'm going to go do a race, even if it's not necessarily the most perfect training stimulus, but it's going to help me with my confidence, going to help me feel good going into the event. And that's really, really important, at least for me.
Yeah. Well, and that, what I would say too, just to add a little bit here, is the confidence is a judgment, and the more you can take out the judgment, the actually more confident you get. Because the
Hmm.
problem with judgments is they're going to go both ways. You get secure or insecure, you get confident or lacking in confidence because you're making judgments all the time. Oh, I was 2 minutes or 2 minutes and 5 seconds instead of an hour and 45 seconds, a minute and 45 seconds. You're going to make a judgment says, well, today's just going to be an average day. That's a judgment. It's average, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, the inner game would say, well, what's interesting? How much can you let go of the judgment, completely let go of the judgment? I don't care. I don't care if it's an hour and a minute and 45 or a minute and 50 or 2 minutes or 2 minutes and 30. What I really want to do is be exquisitely aware of as much as I possibly can. What am I feeling in
Hmm.
every part of my body? Not even just my legs, my arms, my head, everywhere.
Hmm.
What am I seeing around me? What do I feel about the terrain? So what you're doing is you're maintaining interest and you're getting your ego out of the way and becoming more observational.
Yep.
And ultimately that's critical because that's how you really learn is, oh, I noticed something. And
Yep.
as long as you're in judgment mode, you tend to shut down the noticing. You're trying to explain everything and reinforce, this is the Danny Kahneman cognitive error kind of stuff, right? You're just making causal explanations where maybe there isn't one. Maybe it's just, some days are okay and some days are better. And
Yep.
there's nothing more to it than that. But you will never know if you don't have exquisite, what I like to call exquisite observation, particularly for somebody performing at your level, because the differences you're talking about are so minor.
Sure.
And so you really have to have an incredible ability to get rid of the performance objectives and the judgments and get totally into observational mode. And that's really hard. And this is part of what people talk about when they talk about flow typically is they're not really at that point thinking about confidence and goals. They're just in the moment as to
Yep.
exquisitely being aware of exactly what's happening. And so anyway, so just a little bit of thought there.
Yeah, and it's a very Buddhist attitude. I like it a lot, and I think the thing that I would say, like with regards to flow and being in flow state, is you know I think that's exactly what I'm talking about with like getting away from Choski because it's very hard not to judge when you know every minute of the route. It's very hard not to. It's hard to. I guess you could just not look at your watch, but I'm too anal to not do that.
I don't think that's the issue. Yeah, that's not the issue. I think the issue is can you change your attitude from a judgment attitude to an interest attitude? So, oh, wow, I didn't expect to be 10 seconds slower today, but I am. That's really fascinating, as opposed
Hmm.
to, oh, wow, it's just going to be an average day today, which is more of a
Hmm.
judgment, right?
Yeah.
So I certainly feel this playing tennis. I've been playing tennis now for 50 years almost, and I'm a reasonably good tennis player still at my age. So if all of a sudden, I just can't hit the broadside of a barn, it's hard. I mean, sometimes you get very judgmental very quickly. It's like, Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, what's going on? You're the
Yeah.
worst tennis player that's ever come out of it. How come you can't even hit the ball on the strings? You
Yeah.
can do this in your sleep most of the time too. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Look at that. I
Mm.
mean, really interesting because I thought it was going to go great and it didn't. And wow, that's really interesting. And trying just maintaining that state of what's going on as opposed to how am I classifying it and categorizing it from a judgmental perspective. It doesn't mean you're absolutely going to improve instantaneously, but I'll tell you what, there's a pretty high correlation.
Yep.
You certainly end up generally doing better, and you certainly end up learning more. Oh,
Yep.
look at that. That's really interesting. This is going on that I didn't notice before. And does that happen more often? Well, maybe I should pay more attention to that. Again, not in a judgmental way, but just to observe. Oh, does that happen on good days? Does that happen on bad days? Does that happen are there discriminatory factors that I can identify? Because in performance, that's what it boils down to. What are the factors I can identify that really do impact my performance. And
Sure.
confidence is one of them at one level, but confidence can be undermined if you tie it too much to judgments that aren't really related. You don't know that they're actually that. In other words, you say, well, I'm 15 seconds slower getting to this point. But you don't know why. Maybe nothing. Maybe there's nothing you can ultimately learn other than that, okay, I need to accept it. That's the way it is. And there's a certain amount of regression to the mean or whatever, and it's just going to happen. And that's fine. But it also makes you more willing to accept it, I think, even in those cases.
Yep. Yeah, and I agree with that, with everything you're saying, and I think you're talking about mindfulness to an extent, and I think that's
Yeah,
incredibly helpful in the moment. That said, I do still think confidence has a place, and for me, and you could say that this is egocentric or whatever, but for me, the confidence for a project or a race or whatever it does come from objective, quantifiable things where I can say, okay, I ran this trail this season 50 times and I ran it faster than I ever have. Like that, to me, that gives me confidence, And so
sure.
what you're talking about is, to me, is more about how you get there. And I think that's also
Right.
important. But at the end of the day, if I'm the most mindful person and I'm meditating and I'm paying attention and finding interest in all these things and I'm 10% slower on every run than I was last season, that's not going to make me very confident. You know what I mean?
No, 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 no. At the end of the day, performance counts.
Yeah.
But the other corollary to that is performance is the scoreboard, right?
Yeah.
So performance doesn't help you when you're on the field. It doesn't.
No.
You can't do anything about the scoreboard other than execute on the field. But the execution on the field is distinct from the scoreboard. The scoreboard's critical because, as you said, if the scoreboard's going to tell you whether you're making progress or not, and that's critical, and that leads
Yep.
to your confidence. I think in general it helps you gain and improve your confidence because you know where your confidence is coming from. It's
Hmm.
not just that I know that I can run the pulley Choski in X time, right? It's I
Yep.
know exactly how I feel at each moment, and I know why these feelings and these movements propel me to better times.
Yep.
And in that case, you're more confident. It's not just that the scoreboard told me that I ran faster. It's that, well, I'm feeling these things that I know are going to mean I'm going to run faster, or I'm feeling these
Yep.
things that I know may somewhat impede me. And maybe I can do something about that a little bit to make my lesser runs a little better. And overall, your performance improves. So,
Yep.
absolutely. I'm not saying confidence is not important. I'm not saying the measurement's not important. I'm saying, anyway, we can go to this rabbit hole further if you want, but I think you get the point.
No, I'm enjoying it, and I think you're totally right. Yeah. Excellent. All right. Moving on.
Joy is the number five.
Yeah. I think we talked about this a little bit in the context of having fun and doing races and FKTs. And I think that's a big part of it is, you know, you just have to be excited about this stuff. I think if it's a drag, your performance is going to suffer. You're not going to be motivated. It has to be fun to an extent. And finding joy, I think I'm pretty good at this in general because I love what I do and I love it here and I love being outside and in the mountains. And today is like a perfectly clear and sunny day. And I was, outside this morning and that's my favorite thing to do is like be outside in the sun. But just again, when I think about this list of 6 things as a rubric of how I'm going to do things, I think that's an important thing to think about is, okay, is this going to bring me joy? Is it going to make it more fun? Is it going to make it more type 1 enjoyable? Because a lot of this stuff is hard and uncomfortable. It's type 2 fun a lot of the time. So if I can squeeze in some joy, some type 1 fun here and there, I think that's really important.
Yep. Okay. And then the last one, number six, is tranquility.
Yeah, it's kind of like a touchy-feely word. What I really wanted to say was like calmness or like basically not stressed and not rushing was the really big thing. I find that I have, like you probably, a tendency to overbook myself and overcommit to things and say yes to too many things. And then I end up feeling stressed and rushed a lot of the time. And that's a feeling that I really don't like. And I've been prioritizing not experiencing that. So tranquility was the best word that I could come up with for basically saying not rushed is really the
Yep.
big thing that I was trying to say there.
Relaxed. Yep. Hmm.
Relaxed. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And that was again on my kind of personal like life board. That was one of the things I wrote for this month is basically just don't rush, like prioritize not rushing around and having less things to do in the day than I have time for versus the opposite and less things to do in the week than I have time for, et cetera, et cetera. I think that for me, for my mental headspace, which impacts everything, impacts my training and impacts my quality of life is just so, so, so important. So as much as, yes, I would like to say yes every single time a friend here invites me out to dinner or some party or whatever it is, I'm probably going to say no to a lot of those things because I just know that it's more important for me to have more space in the day for myself for the few things that I do prioritize than to say yes to everything and be bouncing around constantly because I've been doing that for the last 4 months and it's been great, but also I can't do that indefinitely or I will just get completely fried.
Yep. Okay. Very interesting and seems like a good rubric to start with.
Thank you. And I
Yep.
guess we could so you wrote a note at the end, which was safety with like 6 exclamation points. So I guess we can address that last. To me, that kind of falls under health, and also, like I said, all these 6 things are kind of in addition to our original rules, which include the famous Rule 16, which was don't die. So yeah, to me, I think that safety kind of falls into health, not getting injured, not getting hurt, not dying. Those are all to me parts of health. Um, and I guess stability too as well. So I think it goes unsaid, but I can understand why you would put that there.
Well, it is a word with multiple meanings and goes back to what we just had the long conversation about inner game stuff. Because safety, of course, as your father, it's like, don't die. Yeah, stay safe, don't injure
Mhm.
yourself, all that general safety stuff. What we think about when we first hear the word oftentimes is literal physical safety. But the other part is mental and emotional safety. So again, the
Sure.
the reason, the fundamental inner game idea of getting the judgment out is you can't fail. Okay. The problem with judgment is there's failure and success. And as long as there's failure and success, you're not safe because nobody wants to fail, particularly a high performing sports person. But
Hmm.
if you're just aware, okay, you say, how aware can I be? There's no judgment. There's no failure and success. You will succeed. If your goal is just to be exquisitely aware, then it's just a matter of how aware you are, but you're not going to fail, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if your
Yeah.
goal is, I'm going to run a certain time, if you don't run that time, you failed and there's going to be a judgment involved and you're going to start undermining your safety. And safety and confidence are closely related. Now, again, it's not
Sure.
pure performance counts. At the end of the day, you're trying to win
Yeah.
the race, you're trying to break the record. So that's hugely important. But most of the evidence that I've seen is that you're more likely to break the record by feeling safe as you're performing. In other words,
Yeah.
you can perform. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about it. You know why you can perform. Okay. The best performers at all levels, they know they're pressing the edge, right? So whatever
Mhm.
sport it is, you're right at the limit of human performance and what's possible. So you're not always going to quote unquote win, whether it's golf or football or running, whatever it is, or climbing mountains
Mhm.
because you're
Mhm.
right at the very edge of human performance. So you're pressing as hard as you can, which just makes every little bit that much more important, right? Every little advantage is that much more important if you
Yeah.
really want to set the record. So
Yeah.
it seems counterintuitive, but many things in psychology and life are counterintuitive that in
Sure.
fact the best way to get control to a certain extent is to give up control.
Yep.
And Tim always used to talk about people are more invested in having a sense of control than actual control. And the greatest athletes have actual control because
Yep.
they are exquisitely aware of every tiny little movement that's going on, everything going on in their brain and their body. They are hugely aware of it. And there's the famous interview with I'm a golfer, so Jack Nicklaus won the US Open at Pebble Beach, one of the most famous courses in the world. And there's a very famous hole, the 17th hole, par three, and he was just barely leading at that point. It was a pretty close match. And at that time, now they hit the clubs are everything is so different. But at that time, he had to hit almost the longest club in his bag, a very hard club to hit, a 1 iron. So almost a driver, very, very difficult club to hit. Okay. And he remembers it vividly because, again, sports people, they remember every moment of these big
Sure.
efforts. And he described actually how his swing wasn't going quite right halfway down. And he made this adjustment. So can you imagine making an
Wow.
adjustment in the middle of your downswing on the hardest club in your bag to hit? And he ends up hitting it a foot from the hole and wins the
Wow.
tournament. Right. And that one really got me when I heard that interview. I was like, well, of course, that's why he's who he is, right? Because he
Yeah.
has that exquisite level of understanding that he could actually, and this is where the confidence comes from because he's so aware of what's going on that he could actually manipulate his swing in the middle of the downswing, which most when they talked to a bunch of other professional, really famous professional golfers who were like, "That's ridiculous." Okay, it's just absolutely ridiculous that you can even think about doing that. And so that's the difference. It's those little things, and safety. It's about that because it wasn't because he's like, "Oh, I'm God." He's just like, "No, I've done this a million times, and I've got this incredible awareness of what my body mechanics are." And so now I can do this kind of thing, even in the tensest of moments under the greatest of pressures, because I'm used to feeling this safety that I can just, you know, go for what I know and let my body do what it's going to do. So that's the
Yep.
other part of safety is that whole blossoming of, okay, I know I can do this. I think you have a lot of it already. I mean, I think we've discussed that fitness has never been your issue, right? When
Hmm.
you had many attempts up Mount Everest, none of them failed because of fitness. So
Yeah.
you're
Agreed.
highly confident. Last time, we'll see how this one goes. You never know. Every time you've gone up there, fitness has never been the issue. You have huge confidence in your fitness. And the
Yep.
question is, can you expand that? Can you make it even safer in other aspects?
Yep. All right.
And also
I like
because
it.
we're your parents, please stay safe. So yeah, that part is still there.
Yep.
We'd like to see
Noted.
you after.
Yep.
After.
Sounds good.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that's a great discussion. It's been a good episode. Great to be back in the saddle. Yeah, we'll continue this next week.
Yeah. Lots of fun. Looking forward
Excellent.
to it.
All right. Well, I will read us out then. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you to everyone who's been here for our first 2 seasons on our first kind of 2 teaser episodes of season 3. Now we will, in theory, be back every week, hopefully, in your podcast feed. Please, as always, send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@choski.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, you can also read my raw training logs, a written version of this podcast, on my blog at tylercandrews.com and get that delivered to your inbox via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Ty's Training is a Choski media production and brought to you by the good folks at the Choski Foundation, the world's only nonprofit supporting coaching traveling community for endurance athletes. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Ciao.